Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Now, if you're like most people, when you hear Mark Antony and Cleopatra, you probably think, well, Shakespeare, Elizabeth Taylor, this huge, tragic romance.
That's the big Hollywood version. And that's actually what we want to pivot away from a bit today. I mean, the personal element is obviously there. It's essential. But when you dig into our sources, well, you've got Plutarch's incredibly detailed Life of Antony. You have the really scathing political attacks from Cicero, who was right there at the time.
Contemporary enemy, yeah.
Exactly. And then historians like Cassius Dio, Suetonius giving context. And what they all show really is that this relationship was much more than just a love story. It was the absolute final violent turning point of the Roman Republic, which had been crumbling for, well, a century.
So that's our mission here. We're doing a deep dive into the, let's say, the specific political and military realities that actually pushed these two huge figures together and why their partnership, ultimately just failed against someone like Octavian.
He was younger, more calculating, a genius, really, in his own way.
Right. We need to get past the myth and understand the foundations, the opportunism, and those final, catastrophic.
It's actually amazing how much material we have, especially considering that the Roman sources are almost all biased against Antony. I mean, heavily biased.
Why so much then?
Well, he was such a central figure, was hugely polarizing in that transition. So documenting his rise and, crucially, his fall became almost a necessity for later historians who were, frankly, trying to justify how Octavian eventually took over and established the principle.
So we need to read between the lines, filter everything through that political.
Always. Every source has an angle, especially.
Okay, let's start with Antony himself. Marcus Antonius Cleopatra, born 83 in Rome. Now, his family background, that seems really important. The gens Antonia, they were plebeian, technically.
Technically plebeian, yes. So not the highest aristocratic rank. But, and this is key, they were definitely on the rise. His grandfather had actually been a consul, which was the top job.
Okay. Upwardly mobile.
Very much so. And his mother, Julia, absolutely crucial. She was a patrician from the highest class, and she was a cousin of Julius Caesar himself.
Right. That connection, you just can't overstate that.
You really can't. When you look at Antony's later career, that family tie explains everything. It's why he had the access, the initial trust. He could attach himself to the most powerful man in Rome. He wasn't just some random talented soldier.
He was family.
He was family. But the Rome he was born into, 83, it sounds like the Republic's height, but it was actually fundamentally unstable.
How so?
Well, you'd had decades of chaos already. It started with reforms, like those by the General Marius, who professionalized the army. Suddenly, soldiers were loyal not to the Senate or the state, but to their general, the guy promising them land, loot.
Personal loyalty overriding everything else.
Precisely. And this instability hit Antony's family directly and brutally. His own grandfather, the consul, was killed in what they called the Marian Purges around 87 BC. Yeah. So this sort of simmering civil war between the Marians and the Sullan, it showed young Antony right from the start that traditional laws, Senate authority, it meant basically nothing when you were up against a powerful general with loyal legions behind him.
So he learned early on that personal power trumps tradition.
He grew up knowing it. And this environment, plus some family tragedies, seems to have shaped his youth. His father died fighting pirates in Crete, 71 BC.
Okay.
Then a few years later, his stepfather gets caught up in that infamous Catiline conspiracy, the coup attempt in 63 BC, and he's executed.
So two father figures, both removed violently? That's rough.
It is. And it seems to have instilled a kind of recklessness in it. The sources, Plutarch especially, suggest Antony fell in with a bad crowd, feckless aristocrats.
Yeah.
He quickly picks up this dissolute lifestyle.
Drinking, gambling, the usual?
The works. Carousing. And by his early 20s, he'd racked up, apparently, just staggering debt. Huge amounts.
Right. And here's what seems like a defining moment for his character. You called it opportunism, as he's drowning in debt. What does he do?
Does he try to sort it out through political channels? Appeal to the Senate? Reform his ways? No. He just flees Rome, heads east in the early 50s BC.
Just runs away from his problems.
Well, runs towards opportunity, perhaps. It was a very conscious pivot, it seems, from, let's say, civilian failure to military possibility. He claimed he was going to study philosophy and rhetoric in Athens.
Oh, did he?
Maybe brief, but the real action, the real goal was joining the military. He clearly understood that in this shattered republic, real power, real wealth, status, it wasn't won in the foreman, it was won out on campaign with the legions.
And his first taste of military life immediately puts him in contact with Egypt?
Ptolemaic Egypt, yeah. The critical geopolitical hotspot. He joins a Roman military expedition around 55 BC, supporting one of the royal factions there.
And that's the first time.
That's the first time he meets the young princess, Cleopatra. She would have been, 14 or 15?
Just a kid, really.
Yeah. It's a minor detail then, but looking back, It's the moment these two massive historical figures first cross paths. He's this up-and-coming Roman officer. She's a girl in a dynasty desperately trying to cling to power.
So he has some success in the East, but he knows where the real game is being played.
Absolutely. He gravitates back towards his big connect, his distant cousin Julius Caesar, who's campaigning in Gaul around 54 BC. And this is where Antony really hits his stride as a soldier.
He rises quickly.
Breathtakingly fast. He becomes a senior commander, but his real talent, his genius, was connecting with the troops. Plutarch really hammered.
How did he do that?
He just got it. He lived rough like them, apparently. Drank with them, knew their names, shared his money around very liberally. He wasn't some aloof aristocrat.
He had the common touch.
Completely. And he wasn't afraid to fight. He was right there in the thick of it, like at the defining battle of the Gallic War, the Siege of Alesia in 52, a very visible, strong military.
But what about the man himself? What was he actually?
Plutarch gives us that really vivid description, doesn't he? The noble dignity of form, the aquiline nose, the beard like Hercules. He definitely looked the part of a Roman hero.
Sounds impressive.
Physically, yes.
Yeah.
But Plutarch's final verdict is pretty damning.
Okay,
he was charismatic, he was generous to his soldiers, but he possessed, quote, countless faults. Boastful, apparent, quick to anger. And he frequently offended the Roman elite, the sort of traditionalists back in Rome, with his excessive behavior, his drinking, his affairs.
But Caesar needed someone like that, didn't? Loyal, aggressive, charismatic, especially facing the political mess back in Rome.
Exactly. Antony gets sent back as a quaestor, which gets him into the Senate. And he immediately becomes a leading voice for the popular faction, Caesar's faction, defending Caesar against the conservatives, the optimist people like Pompey, Cato, and of course, Cicero.
And he plays a key role in kicking off the
instrumental. As tribune of the people in 49 BC, he basically provides the legal cover story. The Senate tries to recall Caesar from Gaul, strip him of command, probably prosecute him. Antony uses his tribune's veto power to block them, defending Caesar.
And when things got hot,
when his own safety was threatened in Rome, he flees north to join Caesar. He was physically present on January 10th, 49 BC, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, that famous moment.
No turning back then. He'd chosen his side.
Absolutely. He tied his fate to Caesar's, and the potential reward was immense.
And he got it. After Caesar crushed Pompey at Pharsalus, Antony's promoted.
Big time. He's made Magister Equitum, master of the horse, which basically means he's the dictator Caesar's second in command, effectively a deputy dictator. And governor of Italy in 47 BC while Caesar's off campaigning elsewhere.
That's incredible trust, the peak of power almost.
It really was, but given Antony's track record, the debts, the instability, why would Caesar risk giving him that much unchecked power back in Rome? It seems like a huge gamble.
What do the sources suggest?
It really speaks to Caesar's priorities at that. He needed absolute, unquestioning loyalty above everything else. And Antony, whatever his fault, was fiercely loyal to Caesar.
But loyalty isn't competent, right?
Not at all. And sure enough, during his governorship, Antony apparently made a mess of things. The administration was handled poorly. He was often absent, seen as arrogant, constantly involved in public scandals.
Like his personal life.
Yeah, like divorcing his wife, Antonia, supposedly over an affair she had, and then very quickly marrying Fulvia, who was known to be extremely politically ambitious herself.
So how did Caesar react when he got back?
The sources suggest Caesar was deeply unhappy with Antony's performance. There was a definite cooling in their relationship. It seems Antony had already shown his limitations as a politician, as an administrator, even before Caesar's assassination. Great soldier, maybe a great friend to Caesar, but not cut out for governing.
Okay, so while Antony is making a hash of governing Italy, let's pivot back to Alexandria, the source of all that wealth and so much trouble for Rome. Cleopatra VII, born around 69 BC.
Right, and she's the end product of this dynasty Ptolemy that had been ruling Egypt for centuries. Since Alexander the Great's general, Ptolemy I Soter, set it up.
But it's crucial to remember they weren't ethnically Egyptian, were they?
Not at all. They were Macedonian Greek, ruling from Alexandria, which was this incredible city, the intellectual hub, the financial center of the Hellenistic world. The great library, the museum.
But they ruled over Egypt. How did they manage that?
They were smart enough to adapt.
Yeah.
To maintain legitimacy with the huge native Egyptian population, they had to adopt Egyptian tradition. So they took the title of pharaoh. They embraced the worship of the Egyptian gods like Isis and Osiris.
And the incest?
Yeah. The institutionalized sibling marriage, marrying brothers and sisters. It was their way of keeping the dynasty pure, keeping power tightly within the family. A strategy for internal control that frankly horrified the Romans.
And this dynasty by Cleopatra's time was really under pressure.
Immense pressure. Egypt was basically the last major independent kingdom left in the Eastern Mediterranean. Rome had already gobbled up the Seleucid Empire, other Hellenistic states. Roman annexation of Egypt was constantly being debated back.
Why the obsession with Egypt specifically?
One word, grain. Egypt was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean.
Right, feeding Rome.
Absolutely essential. The grain shipments from Egypt fed the massive population of Rome and Italy. public. If that supply was cut off or even disrupted, you'd have riots, starvation, the capital could collapse. Cleopatra knew her kingdom's primary value to Rome, and therefore its primary threat was its economic power.
And this pressure shaped her entire life, didn't it? She got her first taste of Roman politics very young.
Incredibly young. She was only about 12 when she actually traveled to Rome with her father, Ptolemy XII. He'd been kicked off the throne, and they went there basically to plead with the Senate for help for his restoration. This was around 58.
Imagine 12-year-old girl.
Think of the education she got. She learned Latin fluently. She absorbed Roman customs, Roman manners, how the political game was played there. It gave her this incredible political sophistication later on. She knew exactly who she was dealing with when it came to the Romans.
And Roman power did restore her father, right, in 55 BC.
It did. A military intervention. And interestingly, Mark Antony himself was involved in that campaign. So that's their paths crossing again, reinforcing that very first contact.
Okay, so fast forward. Her father dies in 51 BC. Cleopatra is now.
And she becomes co-ruler, as per tradition, with her younger brother, Ptolemy III. And they formalize it with the traditional sibling marriage. But the throne was shaky from day one.
What were the immediate problems?
Internal chaos. For one, there were these Roman troops, the Gabiniani, left over from her father's restoration, who were basically lawless mercenaries causing trouble. And then a major crisis. The Nile flood failed.
Which means?
Famine, starvation. So she's juggling threats from Rome, internal dissent from these rogue soldiers, and a natural disaster threatening her all at once.
It's a pressure cooker.
Absolutely. And then into this chaos, fate throws her the ultimate gamble, the ultimate opportunity, the Caesar Gambit, 48 BC.
This is after the Battle of Pharsalus. Caesar defeats Pompey.
Right. Pompey, the great Roman general, flees the battlefield and makes a run for Egypt, seeking refuge.
Big mistake.
Huge. Her brother, Ptolemy III's faction, mostly his advisors, decided to curry favor with the winner, Caesar. So they had Pompey murdered as soon as he stepped ashore. Spectacular. Caesar arrived shortly after, and he is furious. Not necessarily because he loved Pompey, but because these Egyptians had presumed to kill a Roman consul without his say-so. They'd taken away his chance to be magnanimous or maybe just execute Pompey himself.
And Cleopatra sees her chance. Her brother's faction is now on the wrong side of Caesar.
Exactly. She's been pushed out of Alexandria by her brother's people. She realizes her only hope is to appeal directly to the man with all the power.
And this leads to the famous story, the carpet.
Possibly rolled up in a carpet, yeah, or maybe some other accounts say bed linens. Whatever the method, she gets herself smuggled past her brother's guards and right into the palace, into Caesar's presence. And, well, it worked.
The sources say she completely captivated him. He was 52, she was 21.
It's a brilliant political move, wrapped in personal charm, perhaps. A desperate last-ditch gamble. She successfully pleads her case. Caesar ends up executing her main rival, the advisor Pothinus, and then defeats her brother's forces in a short, sharp war in Alexandria. Ptolemy XXXIII drowns trying to escape.
So she secures the throne, but not through Egyptian strength.
No, purely through her alliance with a Roman patron. She was now Caesar's client queen.
And then in 47 BC, she gives birth to his son, Caesarion.
His only known biological son. This changes everything, doesn't it? It raises the stakes immeasurably.
And she doesn't stay in Egypt. She goes to Rome.
She does. Spends about 2 years there from 46 to 44 BC, living quite openly with Caesar, the dictator. While this obviously cemented her power and her alliance back in Rome, politically it was dynamite.
How was it viewed?
With horror by many in the traditional Roman elite. We have Cicero's letters, his writings from the time, and he's scathing about her. They saw her and her whole entourage as this sort of oriental queen grasping after power, the dangerous foreign influence corrupting their dictator, who is already trampling all over Republican tradition.
So when Caesar is assassinated in 44 BC,
she has to get out of Rome fast. She returns to Egypt immediately, consolidates her power again. Ruthlessly, she has her new co-ruler, another younger brother, Ptolemy IV, killed.
Wow.
And then she elevates her infant son, Caesarion, making him her co-king, Ptolemy X v. Caesar. And crucially, in the civil war that breaks out after Caesar's death, the Liberators' War, she makes the smart political choice, siding with Caesar's avenger, Antony and Octavian. She needed powerful Roman allies, and they were the ones fighting Caesar's enemies.
Right, so Caesar's death just rips open this huge power vacuum in Rome. On one side, you've got Mark Antony. He's the master of the horse, Caesar's right-hand man. He probably thinks he's the natural successor, right, to the power, the legacy.
Absolutely, he expected it. But then there's the dark horse, the complete unknown, Octavian. Caesar's great-nephew, only 18 years old.
But crucially,
named in Caesar's will as his legal heir, his adopted son. This sets up an immediate existential conflict between Antony and Octavian. It was always going to happen.
But first, they had a common enemy. Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, the Liberators.
Exactly. So to deal with that immediate threat, Antony, Octavian, and a third figure, Marcus Lepidus, they form an alliance. The second triumvirate, formally created in 43 BC by a law, the Lex Titiae.
And we need to be really clear about what this triumvirate was. It wasn't about restoring the Republic, despite what they claimed.
Not even close. It was a legalized, formal dictatorship shared by 3 men. It granted them absolute power, make laws, execute enemies without trial. It was purely an alliance of convenience, born out of the shared need to crush their common enemies.
Which they did. They defeated Brutus and Cassius at the battles of Philippi 40.
And after that victory, the surviving triumvirs carved up the Roman world between them.
How did that division work out?
Well, Octavian, who was always the more politically astute, the more calculating one, he took the west. Italy, Gaul, Spain. This was smart. It kept him physically based in Rome, close to the Senate, able to manipulate public opinion, secure the loyalty of the Italian heartland.
And Antony.
Antony, the soldier, maybe the adventurer. He took the East, Greece, Anatolia, the Levant, and crucially, the sphere of influence over the incredibly wealthy client state.
So he got the richer half.
On paper, yes, the East was definitely more economically productive, but it was also culturally and politically much more distant from Rome, from the center of power. And that distance would prove fatal later on.
And Lep, the third guy.
Lepidus got sidelined pretty quickly. He was always the junior partner. By 35 BC, he was basically pushed out of power altogether, leaving just the 2 big players, Antony and Octavian.
And their rivalry flares up almost immediately, even through their family.
Oh, absolutely. Antony's wife, Fulvia, remember, the ambitious one he married after divorcing Antonius, she actually started a war in Italy against Octavian, Perusian War, in 41 BC.
While Antony was away in the...
Yeah, supposedly trying to boost her husband's position, maybe force his hand against Octavian. It was a complete disaster for Antony's reputation. Octavian crushed the rebellion.
And then Fulvia conveniently dies.
She does. And this leads to a temporary truce sealed by another political. Antony is basically forced into marrying Octavian's sister, Octavia, in 40 BC.
Just a blatant attempt to over the cracks.
Completely transparent. A political fix designed solely to prevent immediate civil war between the 2 most powerful men in the world. Everyone could see it.
But it didn't last. The pull of the East, and specifically Cleopatra, are too strong for him.
It seems so. He pretty much abandoned his marriage to Octavia, who by all accounts was a respected Roman matron. He settles back into life in Alexandria and reignites his relationship, political and personal partnership.
And this time, it's not just an affair. It's much more serious.
It's fundamental. This is where he shifts his center of gravity, politically and personally. Cleopatra bears some children. Twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, born around 40 BC, ironically, right about the time he was marrying Octavia. Very. And then another son, Ptolemy Philadelphus, in 36 BC. Antony is now completely weaving his own family, his own future, into the fabric of this Macedonian Egyptian dynasty. He's choosing Eastern royalty over Roman tradition.
Okay, so this period in Alexandria, the sources really paint a picture of Antony, well, losing the plot politically. His lifestyle becomes famously excessive. It basically confirms every negative stereotype the Romans back home had about the decadent East.
Well, he was always prone to it, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Plutarch mentions his drinking frequently, but the most amazing detail, maybe the most telling, comes from Pliny the Elder. He says Antony actually wrote a book.
A book about what?
About his own drinking. It was apparently called De Sua Ebreta, of his drunkenness.
You're kidding. He boasted about it.
Apparently so. I mean, think about how un-Roman that is. Roman political society, especially figures like Cicero, would have absolutely crucified him for that kind of admission, let alone boasting about it.
Does that show he just didn't care about Roman opinion anymore? Or was it arrogance, self-destructive confidence?
Probably a bit of both. It feels like he'd mentally transitioned, from being a Roman magistrate who needed to win favor in the forum to being more like an Eastern monarch who felt he was above that kind of scrutiny. He thought his power base in the East was secure enough. He surrounded himself with, philosophers, actors, poets, engaging in this sort of theatrical, almost performative debauchery.
And the story that really crystallized this image for the Romans, the ultimate symbol of decadence, was the wager, right? The pearl story.
Ah, the pearl. Recorded by Pliny. It's perfect propaganda, isn't it? Antony and Cleopatra supposedly make a bet about who can host the most lavish, expensive feast.
And Cleopatra wins.
She takes one of the 2 largest, most famous pearls in the entire world off her earring, drops it into a cup of strong vinegar, which would dissolve the calcium carbonate, and then just drinks it down.
She drank a pearl.
That's the story.
Yeah.
A literal destruction of immense wealth for just a fleeting moment of showing off. Now, whether it actually happened exactly like that, who knows? It might be exaggerated or even made up. But the fact that this story circulated, that it was believed, that it was recorded by serious authors centuries later, it tells you exactly how the Roman world saw their court in Alexandria.
Wasteful, extravagant, contemptuous of Roman practicality.
Exactly. Utterly decadent. Meanwhile, back in Rome, you've got Octavian carefully cultivating this image of himself as moderate, traditional, embodying Roman virtue, even while ruthlessly consolidating power.
So Antony desperately needs a big military victory to shut down the critics, eclipse Octavian.
He needs glory. And he sets his sights on the Parthian Empire, the only major power Rome hadn't really subdued. He wanted to avenge the humiliating defeat of Crassus back in 53 BC, conquer new territory.
Recent.
Basically put himself on a par with or even above Caesar and Pompey.
So he puts together a huge army.
Massive. Estimates are over 100,000 men. He launches this grand campaign into Parthian territory in 36 BC. It was meant to be his defining triumph.
But it wasn't.
It was an unmitigated disaster, a complete failure, mostly due to terrible logistics and planning.
What's it wrong?
His reliance on his ally, the king of Armenia, Artaxerxes II, proved fatal. The Armenian king basically betrayed him, abandoned him, taking vital supplies and baggage trains with him. Antony's army was left stranded deep in enemy territory.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Facing disease, a brutal climate, grueling marches, and constant harassment from highly mobile Parthian horse archers, Antony was forced into this devastating retreat. He lost something like 30,000 men, a huge chunk of his army, and achieved absolutely nothing strategic.
So his military reputation, the one thing he always had,
Severely damaged, tarnished. And this military failure is then compounded by the political disaster that followed. It leads directly to the single worst blunder of his career, the donations of Alexandria in 34 BC.
This is what really gave Octavian the ammunition he needed, wasn't it?
Everything he needed. It was like Antony gift-wrapped the propaganda war for him. First, the setting. Antony holds a Roman triumph, that sacred victory parade for a conquering general, but he holds it in Alexandria, not in Rome.
Which was unheard of.
Completely outrageous to Roman sensibility. Triumphs belonged in Rome, celebrated before the Senate and people of Rome. Holding it in a foreign capital was seen as a massive insult, a rejection of Roman tradition.
And then the ceremony itself, the costumes.
The visual symbolism was horrifying to Rome. Antony and Cleopatra allegedly appeared dressed as Egyptian gods. He is Osiris, she is Isis. It screamed foreign monarchs demanding worship, not Roman magistrate. But the real damage, the political declaration of war, came with the donations themselves, the proclamation of title. Antony, standing there with Cleopatra, publicly gives away huge chunks of Roman territory, or territory Rome claimed influence over, to their children.
Carving up the East.
Essentially, yes. Their son, Alexander Helios, was named king of Armenia and Parthia, which Antony hadn't even conquered. Cleopatra Selene, their daughter, got Cyrenaica, part of North Africa. The younger son, Ptolemy Philadelphus, got Syria.
But the killer blow, aimed directly at Octavian,
was naming Caesarion Cleopatra's son, Julius Caesar's biological son, as king of kings, ruler of Egypt, and most critically, publicly acknowledging him as the true heir to Julius Caesar.
Oof, that's a direct challenge.
It's an existential threat to Octavian. His entire political identity, his legal standing, his name, his inheritance, his legion's loyalty. It all rested on him being Caesar's officially adopted heir. Antony just tried to erase all that, using Caesar's actual flesh and blood. It was an astonishingly foolish political move.
And Octavian just pounced on it.
Immediately, he launched probably the most effective, ruthless propaganda campaign in ancient history. He took everything Antony did, the ceremony, the titles, the relationship with Cleopatra, the alleged plan to move the Roman capital to Alexandria, and amplified it, twisted it.
Using the narrative Cicero had already laid out years before.
Exactly. He dusted off Cicero's old attacks in the Philippic. He didn't need to focus on Antony's military failures anymore. He focused on the moral fail, the decadence, the foreign queen, the betrayal of Roman values, the going native in the East.
So he paints himself as the defender of Rome.
Precisely. The defender of tradition, of Roman piety, of virtue, against this corrupting foreign influence embodied by Cleopatra, who had supposedly bewitched poor Antony. And then came the final straw. Antony formally marries Cleopatra, according to Egyptian rites, without legally divorcing Octavia back in Rome.
Which was illegal, or just scandalous.
Both, really. It allowed Octavian to do something extraordinary. He somehow got hold of Antony's will, possibly illegally seized it from the Temple of Vesta, and read selected parts of it out loud to the Senate.
Then what did it say?
Crucially, it confirmed Antony's gifts of territory and, allegedly, expressed his desire to be buried in Alexandria alongside Cleopatra, not in Rome.
That was it then. Game over.
Pretty much. Octavian had all the justification he needed. He persuaded the Senate in 32 BC to declare war. But, and this was his masterstroke, he framed it very specifically. It wasn't a declaration of war against Mark Antony, his fellow Roman. No, it was a war declared against Queen Cleopatra and the kingdom.
Maintaining the fiction of avoiding civil war.
Perfect. He wasn't fighting a Roman rival. He was leading Rome in a righteous war against a dangerous foreign enemy. an Oriental despot who had led a good Roman astray. It was pure political genius.
So this sets the stage for the final showdown, the War of Actium. This is the last of the great Roman civil wars, and the scale was enormous.
Absolutely massive. Probably the largest military buildup the Mediterranean had ever seen. Maybe upwards of 200,000 men involved across both sides, armies and navy. Antony and Cleopatra mustered their forces in Greece.
And the decisive clash came at...
Yes, the naval battle off Actium near the entrance to the Gulf of Corinth, September 2nd, 31 BC. This was it. On paper, Antony and Cleopatra might have looked strong. Their ships, their fleet, included these very large, heavily built warships, quinqueremes, and even larger, powerful floating fortresses almost.
But
they were slower, less maneuverable. And this is where Octavian's admiral, Marcus Antonius Agrippa, really showed his brilliance. He was arguably one of the greatest naval commanders in Roman history.
what was Agrippa's strategy?
Agrippa understood the weakness of Antony's big ship. He used a fleet composed mainly of smaller, lighter, much more agile galleys, probably Liburnian. They could dart in and out, outmaneuver the larger vessels, harass them, break their formation. Agrippa also seems to have blockaded Antony's fleet in the Gulf beforehand, cutting off supplies, weakening morale.
So superior tactics and better ships for the conditions.
Superior tactics, better ship types for that kind of close-quarters battle, and probably better trained and disciplined crews in Octavian. The battle itself seems to have been quite chaotic, but Agrippa gradually gained the upper hand.
And then came the moment, the turning point.
Yes. At some point, when it became clear the battle was likely lost, or perhaps when Cleopatra's squadron became separated or felt threatened, she made a break for it. Her ships hoisted sail and fled the battle, heading south.
And Antony followed her.
He did. Seeing Cleopatra leave, Antony abandoned his flagship, transferred to a faster ship, and broke through the lines with a group of remaining vessels to follow her back to Egypt.
Abandoning their main fleet and army.
Exactly. Thousands upon thousands of soldiers ashore, and the bulk of their fleet still fighting or trapped in the Gulf. It was a catastrophic failure of leadership, a complete collapse of morale.
What happened to the forces left behind?
They basically surrendered. Many of the ships were captured or burned, the legions ashore, leaderless and demoralized, eventually defected to Octavian. He didn't really need to fight another major battle. Antony and Cleopatra's flight had decided the war.
So they make it back to Egypt, but the writing...
Completely. Their support collapsed. Allies desert them. Octavian, always methodical, takes his time consolidating his power in Greece and Asia Minor, then makes his way towards Egypt, arriving in the summer of 30 BC.
And Antony and Cleopatra know it's over.
They know they face certain defeat. And worse, for them, the ultimate public humiliation, being captured and paraded through the streets of Rome in chains as part of Octavian's triumph.
So, man.
Antony takes his own life first. On August 1st, 30 BC, the story goes he stabbed himself after receiving a false report that Cleopatra was already dead.
But she wasn't.
Not yet. And Plutarch gives us that incredibly dramatic, almost cinematic scene. The dying Antony, realizing his mistake, asks to be carried up to the monument or mausoleum where Cleopatra had barricaded her. And he supposedly dies there, in her arms, maybe asking for one last glass of wine.
And Cleopatra? She holds out longer.
About 10 more days. She's captured by Octavian's soldiers. Now, Octavian really, really wanted her alive. Capturing the famous queen of Egypt, parading her in his triumph, that would have been the ultimate symbol of his victory.
But she denied him that.
She was absolutely determined not to suffer that humiliation. Around August 10th, 30 BC, she took her own life. She was 39 years old.
And how did she do it? The asp story is famous.
The snake, the asp, hidden in a basket of figs, that's the most enduring image, immortalized by Shakespeare. But most of the ancient sources actually suggest she probably used a fast-acting poison, maybe something she carried in a hairpin or another concealed object. Quicker, more certain than a snake bite, but the asp story is certainly more dramatic.
So with their deaths, that's the end of the line for the...
3 centuries of Ptolemaic rule in Egypt gone. Egypt is formally annexed. It doesn't even become a standard Roman province under the Senate. It becomes Octavian's personal property, governed by his appointee. He controlled the grain supply directly.
And their children. What happened to Caesarion, especially?
Octavian showed his ruthlessness there. Caesarion, the potential rival claimant as Caesar's son, was quietly hunted down and executed. Too many Caesars, as Octavian supposedly said.
Chilling.
It is. Antony and Cleopatra's other 3 children, the twins and the younger boy, were spared. They were brought back to Rome, paraded in the triumph, though not Cleopatra herself, and then remarkably raised by Antony's abandoned wife, Octavia.
Raised by Octavia, wow.
Yes, though Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus disappear from the record, likely dying young, the daughter, Cleopatra Selene, survived and later married Juba II, the king of Mauritania, another Roman client state.
So the ultimate winner, indisputably, is Octavian.
Absolutely. And he learned crucial lessons from the fates of both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Caesar claimed the title dictator for life and got assassinated for looking too much like a king. Antony acted like an Eastern monarch and was defeated and driven to suicide.
So Octavian plays it smarter.
Much smarter. In 27 BC, he engineers this brilliant political settlement. He formally restores the Republic, gives power back to the Senate and people of Rome.
But not really.
Not really at all. He retains control of the key armies, key province. The Senate grants him unprecedented powers, tribune, consul for years, Pontifex Maximus eventually, and the new, unique, honorific title, Augustus, the revered one.
So he becomes Rome's first emperor.
While meticulously maintaining the illusion, the facade that the Republic lived on, he ruled effectively as an autocrat, but without the hated name of king. And the story of Antony and Cleopatra becomes the essential narrative explaining this transition, the chaotic, decadent end of the old republic, necessitating the stable, ordered rule of Augustus. #outroaraggle.
So looking back over this deep dive, the Antony and Cleopatra story, beyond the Roman, was really the final blazing political firestorm of a republic that had been dying for a clash of huge personalities, yes, but also cultures, ambitions, and fundamentally different political.
We've really seen, I think, two main forces. On one hand, you have this incredibly charismatic, ambitious soldier, but ultimately a deeply flawed character, prone to the self-destructive impulses, terrible political judgment, moment, and just a disastrous failure to manage Roman public.
And on the other side, Cleopatra, this fiercely intelligent, determined Hellenist, using her kingdom's unique economic leverage, her own political skill, her alliances first with Caesar, then Antony, in this constant, desperate struggle, independent, or at least autonomous, as Rome consumed the world around.
And then, sort of quietly maneuvering behind them both, the third, shrewd, patient, unbelievably calculating. He just expertly exploited every single mistake Antony made. He turned what should have been another Roman civil war against a powerful rival into this incredibly popular, seemingly justifiable moral crusade against a foreign queen.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given everything we know about Octavian's political skill, cunning, and Antony's well-documented faults, his countless faults, as Plutarch, especially his disastrous disconnect from Rome during the donations blunder. Was Antony's defeat at Actium basically inevitable? Was it baked in from the start?
Or is it possible to imagine a different outcome? Was there any version of Mark Antony, maybe slightly more temperate, a bit less boastful, more politically careful about Roman feeling, that could have navigated that treacherous political? Could he have actually been a match for Caesar's young, underestimated heir? Could Rome have ended up with some kind of diarchy, a shared rule, instead of the monarchy of Augustus?
It really hinges on Antony's character, doesn't it? That what if.
It's fascinating to think.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the raw political power struggle behind the world's most famous and perhaps misunderstood tragic romance. We'll see you next time.